evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. As you know by now, because we're entering our 23rd year on the Writer's Block, I interview writers and sometimes other brands of artists about their work, what they're doing, how they got there, what they might have planned for the future. Because it's not always writers, we're open to actors, musicians, sculptors, all sorts of folks. So if you have an idea for someone who might be right for the Writer's Block under that broad umbrella, watch for our address at the end of the program. I want to add one other note because we're kicking off our 23rd year. We're very proud here of the Writer's Block's 23 years. I'm personally proud of that, and we've got a wonderful team of people here who have helped put that together. But the Writer's Block is just one of many programs produced here in Gloucester by, for, and about Cape Ann residents. It's a wonderful community effort made possible by cable broadcasting. You can't get us on Dish, so talk to your friends, make sure they've got cable, make sure you continue to support our community television efforts here on Cape Ann TV. Tonight, I'm very proud to say we're kicking off with a writer who's well known to many of you. His name is Chester Brigham, and he's become one of Cape Ann's most renowned historians. He grew up in faraway Melrose, although he summered here in Goose Cove for many, many years with his family, and now lives in Goose Cove permanently in the same house. He went to school at faraway Maine in Colby, and for a long time during his working career, he was a writer in the business world. He has since turned to history, and as I said, he's one of our most prominent historians. Welcome back to the Writer's Block, Chester.
How you doing?
I like your new book.
Thank you.
I'm going to start by holding it up right away on screen and see if we can catch that. It's on opposite tacks. And it's a wonderful book about, starts with the two strains of history that have run through Gloucester for centuries, artistry and fishing. And I think the story of how that came about, the conception of the book, is almost as interesting as the good, well-written story within it. Can you tell us how you got this idea?
Well,
Is that okay?
it began really when I was working on my last book, Gloucester's Bargain with the Sea. And I talked a lot in that about artists and writers and fishermen as well. And I kept thinking more and more how different they are, the fishermen and the artists. But then I thought maybe there are some similarities as well. So I thought I'd explore the idea of putting them both between the covers of one book. And in looking for representative figures of each, I found that two of them had been in Gloucester at the same time, a very critical period in Gloucester's history, which was World War I, which is not really known widely as how dangerous a time that was for fishermen in Gloucester. But John Sloan, the artist, was here at the same time. He was known as an Ashcan school artist in New York. And then finally, for the first time, when he wanted to get away from the summer, he came to Gloucester. So he was my artist. And also he was quite a character, and a lot of quotes from him, and he had a very interesting life.
He was called Tabasco.
Yeah, Tabasco.
Tabasco Sloan or something like that.
Yeah, Tabasco.
For his hot temper?
Voice, yeah, his hot, Tabasco temper, that was it, yes. And on the fisherman's side, well, we all know there's a park down next to the Maritime Gloucester and the Coast Guard station called Solomon Jacobs Park. And most people had no idea who Solomon Jacobs was. But around 1900, Solomon Jacobs was so well known that he couldn't make a move without it being reported in the Boston Globe. And the Gloucester paper and the Boston Globe talked about him as being the greatest of the captains courageous and a a man of great spunk and energy and success.
I know I had not heard of him until I saw your book, or even about the park down there by the Coast Guard station.
I know it's sadly overlooked, and hopefully he'll become better known, because he was a remarkable fellow, and he was technologically very advanced. The thing he's best known for is that he, in effect, brought to an end the sailing days of the Gloucester schooner, because he was the first to introduce a gasoline auxiliary in a boat. Auxiliaries had been used in other fields and so forth, but gasoline at that time was so volatile and dangerous that fishing captains were afraid, with wooden boats and cotton sails, of fire on board. And they were right in a way, because Jacob's first boat did catch fire. The gasoline leaked and it caught fire. He lost the boat. They could have saved it, but nobody dared to go on board because they were afraid of explosion. He was also the first to put a telegraph set on a boat, which made very good sense for safety and also for finding fish. And it would have been very useful in World War I for the schooners to have telegraph sets on them to warn them of the German submarines that were blowing up some of the finest of the Gloucester boats. They didn't. The reason that they didn't was that it was too expensive for the fleet owners to install on the vessels that they had. Boats were expendable, men were expendable. But Solomon Jacobs, being an entrepreneur and owning his own boat, always could afford the best and invested in the best for his boats, and he was the most successful fisherman of his day.
I think many people forget, or not forget because nobody was around then, but that the German U-boats were very active just immediately off our coast.
They were indeed.
And it was, as you say, an extremely dangerous time.
Right. And the reason that it caused a great deal of panic was the lack of radio transmission. The Gloucester paper would have a headline that a ship had been lost, and no one knew what had happened to the crew, whether they had survived or not. Well, more often than not, they were able, because the German submarine U-boat captains would say, "You've got 10 minutes to get off in the dory and row." And they might be 100 miles off the Nova Scotia coast, and it'd take them days to get there, and more days to get across Nova Scotia to a train and down to Gloucester, and finally be able to get to a telegraph station where they could say, "Hey, I'm all right."
Just in time for their own memorial service.
Yeah, exactly. Meantime, the family back home is, and also there were stories in the paper, these horror stories about submarines lining up a crew on deck and then diving, and all of the men on deck drowning. And that didn't help in the public eye either. It didn't help instill confidence.
So you decided that you were going to pick this example as John Sloan and Jacob Solomon as examples of these two strains in Gloucester.
Exactly.
And then show them, profile them individually before they get to Gloucester, before Sloan gets to Gloucester. And you did a great deal of research on that. And you mentioned that you made yourself a pain in the neck, or a nuisance, I think, at the Cape Ann Museum library.
Yes.
Can you tell us something about that research process, its length, and the kind of sources that you went to for this book?
Right. And if you begin with the structure, in each chapter I wanted to parallel key periods in the lives of each of the men. For John Sloan, I went down to the Wilmington, Delaware Museum, which has his papers, and that was my best source there, including letters that he had written in Gloucester. For Solomon Jacobs, There's not an awful lot, but the Cape Ann Museum has his papers, such as they are, that were donated by a member of his family. And also the Gloucester Times microfilms, going through those. And also, luckily, that because he had so much coverage in Boston Globe, online the archives of the Boston Globe were
So he died
picked up.
in the
He died in
23,
1922.
24? 22.
Yeah.
So you have to go back a ways.
Yes,
to
and
get
you know,
anything
back
on
to actually online, there's quite a bit on Newfoundland. The Maritimes.
Where he was born, we should say.
Right.
He did not become an American citizen until migrating here as a very young man.
Right. He left at age 60. He grew up in this small settlement along the Newfoundland coast, and the first we know of him, his ancestors came over from England as so-called fishing servants of a fishing company. In other words, they were simply employees, and then some of them stayed on, very few, and eventually it became a parish and developed some form of civilization. Age 16, he went to sea on down easters, so he got his training really on square riggers all over the world. And then at age 25, he came to Gloucester. He started out a fishing family tradition, and he came to Gloucester and back into fishing in a big way. And within 3 years, he owned his own boat. So he was a go-getter.
And this is in, I'm trying to think of the
1870.
right after the Civil War.
You're right. Yes, 1872 or so. And
He was a go-getter.
yeah, and he rose very, very rapidly. But that's
Sloan, on the other hand, was an American,
yes.
and at least a generation, maybe slightly more than a generation, younger
Yes.
than Jacob. Where was he born, and how did he get up here?
Okay, he he was born outside of Philadelphia, and although he was considered a New York painter, he was one of a group from Philadelphia that all went to New York at the same time. They began as newspaper illustrators, reporter illustrators, which called for a good memory and a quick hand with the drawing pen, and they were put out of business by photography when news photography came in. Sloan then became an illustrator, a very successful illustrator in New York, and he never had much money. He and his very colorful wife Dolly, they lived this bohemian life in New York for a long time, and then really doing these paintings of the underside of New York in the immigration years, just around the turn of the century.
Mm-hmm.
Then and he joined the Socialist Party, and in 1914 he finally he made a few extra bucks on his illustrating jobs, and he wanted to go someplace for the summer. Where? There were two people that he had known as fellow artists for the Masses magazine, which was a socialist magazine. And they were Charles and Alice Beach Winter. And they had been in Gloucester the previous year. And they liked it. And in fact, Alice apparently had, she had studied at the Art Students League in New York with one of the artists who had painted summers in Annisquam and then on Rocky Neck. And so she was familiar somewhat with Gloucester through that. After they had spent a year here, a summer, and Sloan said, you know, I want to go someplace. They said, oh, Gloucester's a great place. So in 1914, Sloan spent the summer here,
Right,
in
so-
the Red Cottage.
Right at the beginning of the war. We're not in our involvement in the war, but at the beginning of the war in Europe.
Exactly. When
I want to show a couple of the pictures in the book
Good.
that kind of highlight the opposite tacks, and I want to see if Alex can tell me if I'm getting these, if I get this cover on here correctly. The cover shows a picture of the Sloanes and a picture of Jacob Solomon
and his wife.
and his wife. Now, if our cameraman Alex can tell me if that's good, I'll hold it steady. That's good, says Alex. And then I want to go also to the interior of the book and show one of Sloane's paintings. This is called Signals, and I don't know if it was painted in Gloucester or not.
Yes.
This is one of his Gloucester painting.
Right. Yes. From
It's a very, very nice, appears almost to be a watercolor, although it's oil. I
It
believe.
is oil. Yeah.
So there's some very nice prints here on the cover, the back cover, and inside the book that represent and show us visually what these people look like, and of course what John Sloane produced. You parallel them and you bring them to Gloucester, and then we have some chapters here that I had marked where, the war is heating up, and you have a chapter about, it's getting very close, about deadly inconveniences and anecdotal casualties, because the war seemed remote, but it was drawing closer because people knew some of the victims.
Especially
And-
Solomon Jacobs, because being from Newfoundland, and the Newfoundland regiment was terribly decimated, and right at the beginning of the
So the war is closing
1914.
in.
Yeah.
Now, can you summarize for us those two gentlemen's opposite reactions? The title of the book is The Opposite Tacks. You've got Sloane, who is I don't want to blow the secret, but he's not in favor of the war.
Yes.
And the fishermen are
Right.
very much.
Yeah. That does it. Their careers came down to this this point during finally in 1917 and 18, and by then Sloane had resigned from the Socialist Party. He was disillusioned with the fact that in Europe all of the socialists turned out to be nationalists when it came down to war. But he remained a pacifist. And pacifists were not very well regarded at the time either. I'll get back to that, but just to make the contrast you mentioned, Solomon Jacobs, then age 70, was first in line to enlist when the Navy was looking for reservists to patrol the coast in small patrol boats. So he was signed up as an ensign at age 70. And
They wanted his help.
sorry?
They wanted his help.
Yes. Unfortunately, there's no record of him, specific boats that he was out in, the patrol boats. But the Navy and the Coast Guard was very new at the time, was just being formed. But they were using all kinds of boats that they could, yachts and converted fishing boats, of anything they could find to try to patrol the coast. So Solomon Jacobs was in the middle of that somehow. And John Sloane, meantime, was in this uncomfortable position of being a pacifist in Gloucester, where on the one hand, a lot of crews were having to row for their lives off sunken schooners, and the beaches were being patrolled, and there was a hysteria that reminded me of the McCarthy era of people. If they said the wrong thing, they could be slapped into jail, and with a potential 20-year term in jail. Eugene O'Neill, for example, although it wasn't in Gloucester, he was across Massachusetts Bay on a beach on Cape Cod, and he had his typewriter down on the beach, and the sun glinted off the typewriter, and some over-eager patriotic fellow in a station nearby spotted this glint and took it for a weapon of some kind. The police descended upon Eugene O'Neill, who was innocently having dinner in a restaurant that night, slapped him in jail without allowing him to call a lawyer.
Really?
Yeah. So I mean, it was a period of great hysteria.
I didn't recall. He wasn't allowed to call the lawyer.
Right. Yeah. And somebody right near where I live in the mill on Goose Cove, the resident there, he was arrested for making an unpatriotic remark, so called, and you really had to be careful what you said, and you know, that is a forgotten chapter in 1917-18. But actually, things were much worse elsewhere, because Gloucester was a town that was used to strangers, was used to people off boats, and used to people from different nationalities. So it was not as severe here, but still, Sloan had to watch his step. And my theory is that after 5 years here, where he was very happy, came year after year, long summers, long into the fall, but then at this point, I think it became too much for him, and he left and then never came back.
Never came back. Although he lives into the 1950s, I think.
He did.
Oh,
Yeah.
He's still, well, he's not a young man, but he's not
Yeah.
old. He's
Right. After that, he went to Santa Fe for the summers, which was away from any kind of political or coastal involvement.
Where can, I just got the 5-minute signal. I want to make sure I get a couple of wrap-up questions here. Where can people buy On Opposite Tacks?
It's at the bookstore in Gloucester, and it's at the Cape Mount Museum. And I say under my voice, it's also available online. But I'd like to have people support the local booksellers.
But yes, I agree. We should. But if it's on Amazon, you have to.
Yes.
You gotta get the book
Oh yes.
out there. No matter what avenue it's being sold.
Yeah, but it's not available on Kindle.
It's not okay. Not on Kindle yet. I want to show it again, if I may. This is the cover with the Sloanes and Solomon Jacobs and his wife. And this is On Opposite Tacks by Chet Brigham, his third very impressive history of Gloucester. I want to mention the titles of the earlier works and get them straight. Gloucester's Bargain with the Sea, which was published in '07, I believe.
Yes.
And The Stream I Go A-Fishing In, the musical adventures of Gloucester schoonerman John J. Watson, who was another famous person in his day,
Yes.
who was largely forgotten afterwards. I want to thank you, Chet Brigham, for being on the writer's block again.
John, thank you.
It's a privilege, and I hope the book does well.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I've just got from Alex a 3-minute signal, so I'm going to begin to wrap up for the night. Thank you again, Chet Brigham.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being part of the Writer's Block 23rd year kickoff show. If you've learned something about Gloucester history, especially during World War I, concerning John Sloan and Solomon Jacobs, and Chet Brigham's effort to bring those names to the fore again, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks for being with us, and I'll see you again next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.